So, hello and welcome everybody to another Sacred Wisdom podcast. In this podcast today, we are going to discuss ceremonial magic. Now this goes back to as far as Atlantis, probably before, but we have traces of this where this ceremonial magic happened and ritual. And I am joined with the amazing Stephen Denver today. Hello, my brother. How are you?
I'm doing very well, and I hope all is well with you, Zach.
All is great, my brother. Doing fantastic. Just very hot today, sweltering.
Yes, it is a very warm day.
It is indeed, yes. So first and foremost, just tell, where did the kind of concept of ceremonial magic begin, and what kind of historical period do we have kind of proof of that, or some sort of way of looking at that
I
history?
mean, you really have to go back to the time of the existence of the civilization that had thrived on the Lemurian continent, where the Pacific Ocean is today. And this is really where we see in its most rudimentary basic formation the emergence of ceremonial magic around 5,291,408 BC,
Wow.
with the development of this androgynistic civilization that had thrived with such abundance over many aeons of time on the Lemurian continent, where you had the dragon kings and the dragon princes of that civilization, who themselves were also androgynistic, meaning obviously there was no distinction in terms of there being a male and female gender. So that also played a very important part in the development of ceremonial magic in the civilization that had thrived on the Lemurian continent. And then obviously after that, we see the founding of the civilization that had developed on the Atlantean continent, the islands of Atlantis in the Western world, as well as many of the colonies that had thrived, the crystal cities of Atlantis in many different geographic locations on planet Earth. And we have to remember, when Atlantis was founded as a civilization, it was bioetheric in its resonance, meaning it wasn't exactly interlocked or completely in alignment with the slowed and more condensed vibrations we know today that define the 3D holographic reality of this material dimension. So we know that the bioetheric essence, if you like, of the Atlantean continent was vibrating a much faster oscillating rate than anything we really understand today in the modern age. And this civilization was founded around 476,135 BC. So we have to remember, when ceremonial magic was developed in the civilization of Atlantis, the actual the Nordic Atlanteans, who were these very, very tall humanoids, themselves were bioetheric. Really, that kind of indicates that they had the autonomic potency and ability to reach into the faster vibratory rates of what we can define as the 4D holographic reality of the astral plane, and we're able to converse with the various types of light beings or various types of entities that existed there and obviously still exist there today. So it's these two civilizations, you can call them, parent civilizations, the first being obviously on the Lemurian continent, and the second being on the Atlantean continent at the islands of Atlantis and the various crystal cities in the colony states in the various geographic locations of that civilization that came after. And everything from that time and onward is really where you see the diversification in the various rituals and routines, regardless of languages, regardless of local dialects, regardless of whether it's to do with any aspect of world mythology and world folklore. We see this emergence of a very enriched and very diverse basis of ceremonial magic that had its founding in both the initial civilization of Lemuria and the civilization that came after it, which we can say today is known as Atlantis. Though many individuals will say, well, what about the civilization of Hyperborea? And in it, Hyperborea was very different. It was much more based on occult technology, much more based on the use of the ether or telluric electricity. So although much of the occult technology in the civilization of Hyperborea that had thrived in the Arctic North Polar region, actually long before the civilization of Lemuria and Atlantis, there wasn't really a great, or significant usage of ceremonial magic, because they had a much more integrated approach with the use of ether or telluric electricity for anti-gravity, vehicle propulsion, for medicinal purposes, obviously, and different types of healing. So it was really in those two civilizations that I've just mentioned, you really start to see the emergence of much of what we know today as ceremonial magic. So that's pretty much, encapsulating in the long and complex answer to your question.
So we're kind of programmed to see ceremonial magic, or all types of magic. It's probably come from the days where all the witches were burnt at the stake, stakes put through them and all this horribleness. But it's always looked upon as being quite dark and not very for a positive use. But obviously ceremonial magic can be whatever you want it to be. It's whatever intention you put into that ritual or
That's
ceremony.
right, yeah.
But going back to Lemuria, were they using these ceremonial practices for negative purposes? How do you see that previous period?
I think when you're looking at the genetics of the inhabitants that existed in the Lemurian continent, as with the genetics and the ancestral lineages of those Nordic Atlanteans that existed in their own civilization in the Western world, that was very much connected to how they interpreted their own personalized development of ceremonial magic. So, as an example to what I'm trying to state here, clearly it was the case that with the Lemurian people, we can call them reptilians, we can call them reptilian humanoids. They were androgynistic or hermaphroditic. There wasn't any male or female distinction, as I mentioned earlier. So they were very much into worshipping entities or spirits from the 4D holographic reality in the astral plane. And these were it brought into a connection with the laity or the parishioners, the temple priests on the Lemurian continent, in their crystal cities, their own golden cities, and these vast palaces where the dragon kings, the dragon princes would be very much focused with these temple priests, the laity and the parishioners together, on invocation of what we can class as entities or spirits that some individuals may call demons. And they were classed as life forms that could impart, different types of knowledge, technical prowess, and an indication on how they could move their civilization forwards. They were reaching out in a sense, in a form of interdimensional communication by their use of ceremonial magic. But when it comes to, for example, the civilization of Atlantis, these Nordic peoples, what they were effectively involved in really focusing on was the use of sexual ritual magic. So this is a type of ceremonial magic that was involving, the actual the uses of the male and female genders, the use of energetic resonances from different types of sexual practices that were then connected to entities in the 4D holographic reality of the astral plane. We know from many of the psychic readings that were obviously given by Edgar Cayce, America's sleeping prophet. He talked about the sons of Belial. Belial was the name given to a very potent, shall we say, demonic overlord from the 4D holographic reality of the astral plane, who was, with many other demons, was actively trying to infiltrate the cognition and the thoughts of the male and female Nordic Atlanteans to take control of their civilization, not just on the Atlantean continent, but the islands of Atlantis, the crystal cities of the various colony states of Atlantis, and many different locations around planet Earth.
Do you think they actually knew? Do you think they actually knew that was demonic at the time? Do you think?
Well, again, when we look at the word demon itself, that, it has connotations of something to do with, grotesque life forms, emerging from the 4D holographic reality of the astral plane. But the actual word is obviously from the Greek language, and the word demon simply means provider, and it can mean messenger. So it's providing a type of interpretation in terms of information or knowledge that is imparted to a recipient who would be involved in some kind of ritual or routine that is part of ceremonial magic. And so it's a very intricate process. Not many of these Nordic peoples from Atlantis really had a very clear understanding with what they were dealing with. When you actually study the actual efforts of many individuals who've been actively involved in ceremonial magic in the modern age, you can see that they are very focused on their own ego and very focused on trying to create immense amounts of potential for themselves where they can gain control over one or more entities or spirits or demons from the 4D holographic reality of the astral plane. I think this is what was really going on with the civilization that existed on the Lemurian continent. And I think the same sort of process really began to emerge with these Nordic peoples, these Aryan peoples that had existed and thrived with such abundance in the civilization of Atlantis. And they became so readily identifiable with their own corporeal existences, the need to identify with being male or female, the need to identify with the 3D holographic reality of the material. In a sense, they began to worship the divine creation, but they started to lose the ability to actually adulate and praise the divine love and the infinite oneness of the universal creator of heaven and earth. So you see this this bifurcation has been going on for many thousands and thousands of years when it comes to ceremonial magic, where almost pretty much any civilization that has arisen and then collapsed has temple priests, parishioners, or laity. And obviously you can look at the various kings and queens, princes and dukes and so on. All these different individuals, it's really been about for them their own egocentric behavior. And so in terms of the will, the volition of such individuals, the driving intention has been to gratify their own egocentric needs, requirements, desires. And that's obviously interconnected to sexuality. It's interconnected to the idea that they want to make themselves, immensely wealthy. They want to gain access to, really primordial knowledge that they believe has been stored within the 4D holographic reality of the astral plane. I mean, that could also interconnect with the etheric records and so forth. So it's always been that there's an egocentric addiction for many individuals who become ceremonial magicians, whether that's in the form of being temple priests or being, dragon kings or dragon princes, as with the civilization of Lemuria.
When you say dragon prince, dragon queen,
Yeah.
king, what do you mean by that in the sense of putting dragon on the
Well,
front?
because the royalty of that civilization were not Homo sapiens or human beings that we see today.
And that's Lemuria.
So yeah, absolutely, because it was a civilization where the inhabitants were known and effectively to be reptilian humanoids or reptilian hominids. They were not individuals that we would recognize in terms of corporeal existence today. That you would say, oh yeah, that's a type of Homo sapien or human being with different features and different skin pigmentation. These were very different in terms of their physicality. And
I think, don't you agree that there is a real mixture of types of reptilians, that there is positive,
yeah,
they're not all positive, but there's a lot of negative as well, but there's a whole range, that they're a species just like us, that as human beings, a level of, some are good, some are evil, they have different intentions, don't they?
they certainly do. In terms of the civilization, though, that existed on the Lemurian continent, they actually were very insular. I mean, when you think of the vastness of the Lemurian continent, it was actually larger than the Asian continent, and it was destroyed in stages over many aeons. And obviously, you can see today the remnants of that with the landmass known as Mahalanka in the Sanskrit language, which translates to Great Island, which is Australia.
Yeah,
You
right.
see it with New Zealand and obviously the Polynesian islands and so forth in the Asia Pacific region. We know that they were very much focused on preserving their own genetics and lineage, but the civilization underwent whole scale destruction, and was completely devastated. I mean, this could become a discussion for another, for another day, for another Sacred Wisdom podcast about what happened to any of the survivors who were these reptilian humanoids or reptilian hominids. A lot, we can look at into Hollow Earth folklore, but that again is going off at a tangent. Obviously, they believe that many of them had descended into the Hollow Earth as a form of safety to protect themselves, but the vast majority of them unfortunately passed away. And so it's a civilization that had its own very unique and very distinct form of ceremonial magic. And the same thing really emerged with these Nordic peoples or Aryan peoples on the continent of Atlantis.
Bring it up to modern day, when even like the way human being society is run, there is a form of ceremonial magic in the Monday to Friday 9 till 5, these routines, all these processes, the way the sun goes down and what times shops shut, all this kind of the way society is run, isn't it? So it's been kind of based on this, of the way I see it is almost like a huge ceremony in a way. Yeah. So, yeah, what do you think on that? I mean, in the sense of that, like in the sense of modern day ceremonial magic, but it's right in front of our very eyes, but we
So
don't
you, you're
see it.
you're kind of referring to the idea of occult symbolism sort of
Yeah.
interweaved throughout the seemingly mundane, slowed vibrations of the everyday existences of Homo sapiens or human beings, especially in the Western world,
Very
and
well put.
a whole capitalist system of
Yeah.
third-party debt usury and so on. Yeah, that
It
that
keep,
is very
there's a,
much the case. It's carefully concealed. It is definitely there.
mm,
And so much of what human beings live by on planet Earth, without them seeming to have any awareness of it, is connected to aspects of ceremonial magic to do with the phases of the moon, to do with obviously solar cycles, lunar cycles, to do with even things like meteor showers, and
yeah.
many different aspects connecting obviously to many of the Celtic festivals or Druid festivals that also interconnect with different aspects of European witchcraft. So there is a lot of different occult symbolism and a lot of different cultural interconnections to do with ceremonial magic. And obviously that in terms of frequency, vibration, and energetic resonance itself is interlinked with very much different expanses in the 4D holographic reality of the astral plane. And we can say that the infernal regions or the lower astral was obviously referred to in the Holy Bible as being hell or Gehenna and so on, and it has many different names given to it. You see within Hinduism and obviously in Buddhism that we know that ceremonial magic in some way or other for the rulers, the policymakers, is very important to them,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
terms of
Sure.
identifying with ritualism, in terms of numerology, in terms of, as I was talking a bit earlier about solar cycles, lunar cycles, and actually carrying out some of these rituals on Pacific days,
Mm,
in Pacific months of each year.
yeah.
And much of that was also identified with and adhered to in the civilization that had existed on the Lemurian continent and the civilization that had existed at many aeons later on the Atlantean continent, the islands of Atlantis, and the crystal cities that were the colony states that had thrived with such abundance all around planet Earth.
And ceremonies here, I mean, just from photographing and recently I've done all these walk and talks on ley lines. You start seeing on these ley lines how particular spots have had almost like a ritual. One that's just springing to mind is the plague victims and the way these guys with the sticks came over and they monitored the people's deaths. It was almost like a form of ritual there or ceremony. Very strange and bizarre time,
Yeah.
that period. And they were placed on them ley lines, and that will almost alter that ley line, the energetics of it, won't it?
Of course, that's exactly what it's designed to do, is to create vibrational distortion.
Yeah.
And when you're looking at the use of geomagnetic ley lines and the intersections of those ley lines, a lot of this was known about during the Upper Paleolithic, and we know going back to around 49,527 BC and onward until around 9,392 BC, the emergence of the various rituals and routines and practices, what is known as shamanism,
Right.
emerged. Now, in terms of what we're going to be always told by Western science, that is seen as much more acceptable when it comes to talking about the emergence of ceremonial magic on planet Earth, because they don't accept in any way at all that the civilization that had existed on the Lemurian continent had existed, or the fact that the Lemurian continent existed at all. And the
Just a
same
myth.
goes for Atlantis. So
Yeah.
that's all edited out by Western science and completely ignored, even though, you've got the incredible researches of individuals like Dolores Cannon, and all her client studies in terms of hypnotherapy, and obviously the fantastic work that's been done by the individual known as Michael Newton.
Yeah.
So, and these are just two individuals
There's
that were
lots.
experts in their own academic fields in terms of the use of clinical hypnotherapy, and they really understood about the idea of past life experiences. But there are hundreds and hundreds of hypnotherapists who've had thousands of clients that talk about their existences, on the Lemurian continent, not even being what we would define as a Homo sapien or a human being, or they define themselves as being a temple priest or a temple priestess
Mm.
who has racial characteristics of being a Nordic individual or a Nordic person existing, on the Atlantean continent. So again, none of this is accepted in terms of validity by Western science. So the kind of the version that will kind of be more than not presented as to when ceremonial magic emerged is going to be sometime during the Upper Paleolithic, and then
Mm.
obviously from then into the Middle Paleolithic and the Lower Paleolithic. And we know, for example, that in a more conventional sense, when it comes to Western science, that various shaman from ethnic communities such as the Chulim Turks, the Chakas, the Siberian Tatars, the Altaians, the Tafalas, the Shors, the Telengits, the Kamandi, the Teleuts, the Chalkans, the Tabala, the Urums, the Buryats, and the Yakuts or Saka in the Russian Federation all have an incredibly detailed and very long-term development of their own kinds of Turkic and shamanism. So
Mm.
we know that there is obviously a lot that could be studied there when it comes to understanding from those types of shamanism in the Russian Federation how later stages of ceremonial magic would have developed.
So obviously you had in the West, you had the witches, and obviously when you go over to the East and you have what was shamanism, more was practiced in that kind of location. So what is the etymology of shamanism, Steve?
So we know that in the more conventional sense from Western science, that in the Tungusic languages of the Central Siberian Plateau and northeastern China, the word shaman comes from the word saman, which means knower, and in the plural, samani, meaning knowers.
Right.
And some individuals will say this originated from the Russian language, but there's also other etymologies that are very closely related, and one of which is from the Sanskrit language, which is the word shramana, meaning higher laborer or higher worker. So
Right.
that's
Interesting.
the vocation of the shaman, was to be an individual working with the faster vibrations of the 4D holographic reality of the astral plane and drawing that down on geomagnetic ley lines. And again, these are forms of ritualism that in the most rudimentary basic states of development could be seen as various kinds of aspects that would then develop further over many aeons and could be then placed into a definable set of rituals and routines that could then, we could say, yes, that's a kind of ceremonial magic. So it's interesting. So you've got those two different etymologies. We also know from another etymology in the Irish Gaelic that the actual word shaman actually originates from the word shamanuia, and this means ancient teacher in the
Wow.
actual
Okay.
Irish Gaelic. So
Interesting.
we therefore can then posit that, as obviously Irish Druidism was so incredibly potent over thousands of years,
Mm.
that the Shan Munir or Shamanir, ancient teacher, was really going to be the obviously the Druid priests of the landmass of Ireland. And this obviously would apply to obviously the Celtic Britons, the sceptred Isle of Albion, and this would also connect to the Albion giants. We know, for example, Merlin Willett. In really, we can posit the idea that he was a ceremonial magician whose origins are connected to British Druidism. We
Right.
know that there's connections then to the Albion giants because they are believed to have worked with Merlin Willett to construct Stonehenge, as well as many other standing stones or stone circles across the sceptred Isle of Albion. So
Mm.
we have a lot of interconnections there to do with shamanism, to do with druidism, to do with aspects of European witchcraft, and obviously ceremonial magic. And I think that's very important to really bring a lot of this together. We have to remember also from the Greek language that the word magic or magikos, it means holding power. That's what it actually means. So
Right.
somebody who was a magician, who was somebody who was able to contain, to focus and direct their own occult power, their occult potency, and direct it through their own will and volition in specific directions outside space-time through the 4D holographic reality of the astral plane, and were able to manifest and bring things down and slow through willpower, through volition, through chanting, through invocation, these much faster kinds of frequencies, vibrations, and energetic resonances in the form of, shall we say, entities or spirits from the astral plane. Just and that again,
That's
that's
very
obviously
interesting.
that
What
can be
gets
seen
what?
as being connected to devil worship, in terms of when it
Mm.
comes to the Holy Bible and Christianity.
What gets me is that the way this is all used for dark purposes or negative purposes, and the way
Yeah,
it's hidden from the public. Obviously, we just discussed and said we are all performing some sort of ceremony when we go to work or we go to, go on our
yeah,
routine. But we can use this for positive means, with intention, positive ways. But it's used for such a negative force, it
yeah.
seems, in this day and age.
Hmm.
It doesn't feel like it's used, and obviously you can go to the point of where, even 200-300 years, and it does maybe go on today as well. But where they actually sacrifice and stuff like this as well is very insane. That we have built,
Yes.
almost become separate from this knowledge, and
Well,
somehow somebody
yeah,
thinks that's for our
absolutely.
benefit. I don't know. I mean, I what do you think on that? I don't feel it is for our benefit, and I don't feel it ultimately is for their benefit either. If they're holding that knowledge, I feel that's so
Yeah.
dangerous for
Well, I think
for everyone.
I think when you look back, for example, just to sort of give a bit of a background to, going back many aeons into the distant past, we know the etymology, for example, of the word druid comes from the Irish Gaelic, meaning druith, meaning truth servant, also
Right.
drouth, meaning truth servant, and there are many other variations. I'm not going to list them all because there's a lot of them, but in the Irish Gaelic, the incredible language from the landmass of Ireland, we know that the fact that the Druids were seen as these truth servants meant that they were very honourable individuals when they were
Mm.
using their own type of ceremonial magic. Now, what you're saying is, when we can see now, especially in the modern age, especially in the Western world, that
Right.
much of what we see in terms of connotations surrounding what ceremonial magic is being used for is very egocentric. It's about self-gratification. It's about trying to get one over on other individuals. It's about trying to make individuals believe they're better than other
Mm.
individuals because they've got some kind of incredible interdimensional knowledge or
Yeah.
communication with spirits or entities that are actually demons, that don't have any care at all. They don't have any kind of cognition like a Homo sapien or human being,
Mm.
and are basically expert manipulators and some very subversive life forms that are only trying to manipulate and control others. And yet many of those who become ceremonial magicians are deluded enough to believe through their own egos and their own filtered perception of the 3D holographic reality of this material dimension around them, that they somehow have ultimate control over such entities or spirits through the
Yeah.
use of the rituals of ceremonial magic. So it's the driving intent again is really to do with their own egocentric thinking, their own self-gratification, and that's really putting them on a pathway to self-destruction. And it is
Yeah, but
extremely
these are
negative in terms of
sometimes some of the people,
vibration.
some of sorry for interrupting, Steve, but
Yeah,
the
yeah,
people we live who are in power today in the world, it's quite obvious some of these guys do ceremonial magic in the way they do
yeah.
their rituals, and the city, the skyscrapers, the way they
Yeah.
design these huge buildings to hit the light. The light will
Mhm.
spin around as the sun goes down around these buildings.
All you got to do is take a look at the obsessive, quite destructive ceremonial magic that an individual that many people will have heard of, the English occultist,
Yeah.
Edward Alexander Crowley or Aleister Crowley, along with other individuals like Austin Osman Spare, others like Samuel Liddell Mathers or Samuel Liddell McGregor Mathers, and Cecil Frederick Russell, that
Right.
all of them were motivated by their own male egos, the need to be self gratified, the need to gain potent control over entities or spirits and have some sort of access to what they believe was superior interdimensional knowledge or information that would embetter them and make them seem, above others in some way or another. And they became very fixated on the 4D holographic reality of the astral plane,
Do you think it
very
was?
focused on disconnecting themselves from on a heart level. None of them had any empathy really or compassion for other Homo sapiens or human beings. And you take an individual like Aleister Crowley, he
Yeah.
was really quite demonic in many
Disturbed.
ways, very malevolent individual.
Hmm. I mean, he was, what he's apparently was summoning monsters. The Loch Ness
Yeah,
monster from his little
yeah,
little
yeah.
place on the side of Loch Ness that he
Again,
owned.
it's the addiction to ego. It's all about some having some kind of potent interdimensional control over some other kind of life, an etheric type of existence that they could control and have dominance over for their own nefarious intentions.
Now, I
So
mean,
it's not
we,
positive. A lot of ceremonial magic, especially not in the modern age, and especially not in the Western world. And any of the more positively based types of or kinds of ceremonial magic are not really kind of promoted. It's all to do with, again, the new age movement. A lot of it's being blurred. There's a lot of distortion and misinformation,
Hmm.
which means there's deliberate dissemination of incorrect kinds of information when it comes to ceremonial magic, again because it's about creating a lot of negativity for control purposes over the unconsciousness of many individuals who are gullible enough to want to study ceremonial magic because they believe they can control an entity or groups of spirits from the astral plane, and nothing can really be further from the truth. It's very dangerous to get involved in such
Very.
activities, and it's very negative. It's very much against the divine creation to do so. It's very much against the divine love and the infinite oneness of the universal creator of heaven and earth. It's not good. Ceremonial magic is something you can study it from an objective perspective where you're not obviously involved in summoning
Yeah.
or invocating these kind of etheric life forms in studying the history of it, but individuals that do go down that path and start developing a career for themselves as a ceremonial magician, it's a very risky, dangerous decision that they have made.
I remember as a kid doing the Ouija board, and I remember the sense of this glass moving around a table, a group of friends, 3 or 4 friends, and it did move, no doubt. And
Yeah,
but I can't see how somebody could get excited about that force, whatever that force was, whether it was telekinesis or it's just our subconscious energy moving it. I don't know exactly, but it certainly was moving around the table very quickly. But I
yeah,
can't
yeah,
see in my own perspective, but maybe there are people like that, and there are people that just enjoy that lust of power and that sense of the unknown, and letting that unknown, it's almost like a naughty love affair almost, that they're having with this dark entity, to kind of it's very bizarre, because like I would think, well, if you were in a position where you had a lot of wealth and money, you would think that you'd want to put that energy into something positive and
Yeah.
for the light, and understand the course of life, and understand that, we are going into an astral plane. We are going to return to the God source energy at some stage. So we don't want to tamper with that.
No, the very actionalization of getting involved in ceremonial magic in terms of invocation is always motivated predominantly by the ego. The same with the temple priests that you see, and the dragon kings, the dragon princes of Lemuria, the various Nordic peoples or Aryan peoples of Atlantis. It was all the same. It was all about capturing the attention of the audience. It was all about ensuring that they were the center of attention. It was all about showing off and that they were superior with access to interdimensional knowledge, and they had some control over these entities or demons. There's many different names for them, but it's really comes down to the same motivating intent, and that is the desire for control and the ingratiation of the ego. So it's all this egocentric thinking, and nothing really else. So it's all about the self. It's about corporeality. It's about being, trying to interlink the astral plane in a very inverted and negatively based way with a 3D holographic reality, this material dimension, where they are the center of attention. And ceremonial magicians a lot of the time end up actually possessed by very, very, very malevolent dark spirits
Mm.
from the astral plane, and that makes them even more risky and quite dangerous individuals to be around. So
Yeah,
we can see that from Aleister Crowley as well. You could clearly see that with him. You know,
yeah, and well, I won't name names, but you can clearly see it today as well, and it going
there's a
on. I
lot of
mean,
it going on,
mm,
and if you take one of the most incredible individuals who's ever lived on planet Earth, which is Carl Gustav Jung.
yeah,
He studied the connections between Western occultism, Eastern occultism, and the psychology of Homo sapiens or human beings. And he made some very astute observations on the why has been this usage for thousands of years of ceremonial magic, and that can obviously include aspects obviously of shamanism and witchcraft and so on and so on, obviously. And it's very interesting. It always really is to do with that individual human being that is very focused on their own ego. It's actually very anti-spiritual what they're
yeah,
doing with ceremonial magic. It's about being greedy. It's about being malevolent, being, the need to control something outside space-time in the astral plane, especially within the infernal regions.
mm.
That can be defined as hell or whatever. And then there's a thrill that's involved with that individual. Their ego gets a kind of a buzz or a thrill from
Do you
doing
think
that.
these demons that they're summoning? Do you think they are fallen angels, going back to the kind of ancient sort of text of what do you think on that? And then possibly these fallen angels or these demons being some sort of dark ET. How do you see that?
I think I think to go into that subject perhaps could be discussed another time. But in terms of ultra terrestrials and extraterrestrials, yes, we know from much of what Edward Alexander. So that again, we know that for much of what Edward Alexander Crowley or Aleister Crowley was involved in, that there's a lot of questions surrounding the entities that he was summoning, and there's even question of whether perhaps these entities were Zeta Reticulan type A greys or Zeta Reticulan type B greys
Mm,
that were using some kind of psionic shielding, some kind of hologram to disguise themselves, and may have appeared as entities or demons, but may have been actually malevolently based extraterrestrials. Again, that's open to speculation. Again, that cannot be proven either way, but there's definitely a lot of questions surrounding different aspects of ceremonial magic, and also any crossover with ceremonial magic and different kinds of occult technology. There's always been that connection that's been made with the Rigelian Greys, for example, who
mm.
the Tall Greys, the Greadans, they're very much involved in their own type of Rigelian occultism. to the
Right.
use of occult symbolism, the use of glyphs, and all kinds of different aspects to their own cultural bases that aren't really fully understood here on planet Earth. But again, these different crossovers, these interlinks. It's really all speculation. There's no
Yeah.
clear proof and to say this is this and this is that. So again, it's all open to speculation.
Well, thank you, Steve. That's going to be the lot on this information for now, but there is more information on this in our book, Luminous Worlds, which you can purchase on Amazon on ebook and paperback, and it's available on my website as well. But it really truly is amazing that we are actually living a type of ceremony every day without even realizing it, if we're living by other control and other systems that kind of operate above us. And we have to be aware of this, be aware of what intentions we're putting into the world and what how we're seeing the world. Be careful of the media and how they translate the world and make us think in a certain way. This is all a form of ritual to some level, and we are going to get through this stage eventually, aren't we, Stephen? I feel so. As we know, 2035, we're going to start somewhere new, which is fantastic eventually. But all this stuff, we've got to understand it. We've got to kind of understand, how we are interacting in that frequency. And it's important so we can empower ourselves and not be affected by that. And it can be very difficult that in this day and age. But is there anything else you'd like to add, Stephen?
There's a lot more we could discuss, but it's such a vast subject, and for the sake of the time that we've allotted for this Sacred Wisdom podcast, there's not much else I can really add. No.
Yeah, amazing, Stephen. Excellent subject. Well, look, it's a bye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.